Welcome to the Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples podcast. This podcast is for anyone expecting or currently raising multiples, twins, triplets, or more. I speak to inspiring parents of multiples who have healed from unexpected pregnancies and birthing experiences and who candidly share the highs and lows of raising multiples. I also speak to the professionals that work with multiple birth families. Together, we cover the practicalities of raising more than one baby at a time, as well as enhancing the emotional well-being of caregivers and children alike. Come join us as we laugh, cry, and share our personal and professional wisdom on all things multiples. I am your host, Dr. Christina Kvetsa, and I am a fierce kind mama of multiples. On today's episode, I speak with Dr. John Mascazine. Dr. Mascazine is an associate professor of education at Ohio Dominican University in Columbus, Ohio. He was a classroom science and math teacher for 12 years at the elementary, middle, and high school levels before studying for his doctorate degree. His specialty is science education and the integration of mathematics and technology. His research areas of interest include learning strategies, study habits, and twin and multiple birth student learning and school experiences. He has consulted for schools and twin support organizations locally, nationally, and internationally. In this episode, John shares useful information on twins' learning styles and how parents and educators can nurture their individual children's learning needs. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, I'd love to welcome today Dr. John Mascazine, who's going to be speaking about his research on multiples learning styles. Welcome, Dr. John. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Christina. I am a professor of education at Ohio Dominican University, but I always consider myself a teacher first. My background is in elementary up to grade 8 and beginning high school in the United States. And I count my years in the classroom as really propelling me into this kind of work. When I began twin studies in about 1995, I realized that no one was really looking at how twins learn. Yeah. Twins have been used in various studies all over the world and all over medicine and psychology, but no one really looked at what they did in school and how they were getting along in school. And I heard from parents that this was a great concern, not only the placement issue, but other events that happened throughout the school years. So I began to use part of my dissertation research to look at just how do twins learn, either differently or similarly in the classroom. So that's kind of what propelled my work originally.
Yes, that's remarkable because, I think that what you say about twins often being researched and used in studies, but no one really investigating their learning styles and how the issues that can come up for them in school. And I wonder, was there kind of a defining moment that, in your experience as a teacher, like had you taught twins and then noticed something that made you think, we really should be studying this?
Yes. In fact, as in a childhood, I had neighbors that were identical twin girls. They were 1 year ahead of me in school, and I was always fascinated at their relationship and their study habits and their school experiences. So that kind of got me thinking. And then when I started looking at the differences in how everybody learns, I began to look at, I wonder if twins really study and learn the same way. And this opened up the research where I compared monozygotic and dizygotic, or what we call identical or fraternal twins, or what we now call, identical and non-identical twins is a more familiar term today. But I looked at how they learn, and I looked across 5 different sections and found out that they don't learn similarly. They share about even identicals share about 40% of the ways in which they learn and study, but there's 60% for each twin that is their own style, their own way of studying. And so I found this fascinating, and I confirmed it with interviews and talking with parents and talking to the twins themselves, all sorts of twins all the way through school. and found out that this is indeed true, that they develop their own way of studying. And sometimes they'll even talk about it with each other. They'll say, well, I don't do what my brother does because he's kind of studying crazy when he studies. I do this for my particular style. And in some ways, twins can actually be ahead of the curve in actually discovering how they learn and how they study. And that can be a great advantage to them in school.
Hey, that's really interesting. I wasn't expecting there to be such a difference, even amongst the identical twins.
Follow-up studies, I'm conducting a study right now that's looking at the talents and motivations. Why do twins want to do some kind of subject study or hobby, or go into taking an instrument in band or taking up theater? So I'm now conducting a study with twins to find out if they share similar motivations. I don't have enough evidence yet to say what the outcome will be, but it looks like it's mirroring some of the evidence and some of the data that I've seen in the learning study.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, it's not only important to parents, because parents have to realize you have to provide differently for each one of your children. Even though they may look alike and be alike, and parents know that they're not exactly alike, they have different interests, they have different favorite colors, different books they like to read, hobbies, etc. But also in their learning, they may approach learning differently. So we may have to set up different learning settings at home that would be more matching what their style is.
Okay.
And then if this is happening in the home, obviously in the school, we want to make sure teachers realize that we don't expect twins to always study the same or learn the same or excel the same in school. The same with their peers too. Peers can sometimes expect, twins to compete with each other all the time. That's not always true. And the way they compete, this has just opened up all kinds of research that we really need to really start investigating. There are so many questions that have yet to be answered about how to help teachers and parents do the best for the learning that their children are going to encounter.
Yes, I think that's such an important point. There's so much there that I think we could expand on. And when you were talking about the competition, that's an area that I've become really interested in because I have identical twins. I'm not a very competitive person at all. And I don't know where they picked it up, but they seem to naturally want to compete when they're playing games, like just anything that they're doing, even riding their bikes. Who can ride faster? Who can ride more? We might get into that a bit later, because what I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about, which is I imagine, some parents might be listening to this thinking, what do you mean by learning styles? What do you mean by, even identical twins having different learning styles? Could you maybe expand a bit on that, what you mean by that?
Yes, I can. When we say learning styles, we're talking about the ways that we get information into our brain and what happens within our brain when we process that information or make sense of it, and also how we output that information. So there's 3 parts to learning styles, and it can be in different categories. There are 4 basic categories. They are the physiological, having a cup of tea or having a snack while you're studying. For some people, that is a great help. And time of day is a physiological one. Some of us are just not morning people. And if you try to approach a tough problem in the morning, that may not be the best time for some people to actually work on a problem. So we have this category of physical or physiological. Then we have environmental, which is what environment do we set up for ourselves when we really need to concentrate and study. For some people, it's a quiet environment. It may be brightly lit. It may be dimly lit. We may need it to be warm. We may need to have a fan on us. I encountered a couple students, 2 identical twin boys, who when they studied, they each had to have a fan blowing on them when they studied.
Oh,
and
wow.
I said, did you try studying without that? And they said, yes, but I have to have that fan blowing on me all the time. So again, the environmental factors are very, very important. Then we have social factors. Some of us really like to study alone by ourselves. Some of us like to study with one other person, and sometimes that person might be someone our own age, or it might be the teacher, it might be a parent, it might be an adult, someone we consider who knows more. Or we may study in groups larger than 2 people, which usually be 3 or 4 people in a group.
Yeah.
The interesting thing I found is most twins I interviewed opted for the solitary study method. And
That's
even
interesting.
though they would compare notes occasionally, one brother or sister would say to their brother or sister twin, Are you ready for that test tomorrow? Or do you know what date this is? Do you know how to add these numbers? They'll
Yeah.
challenge each other. But basically, there was a preference for really trying to study by myself.
Okay.
And even though they study alone, they
Yeah.
often arrive at the same similar result. And this opens up a can of worms for teachers because they think, they'll give an assignment, write about a fantastic vacation. And the twins will go home, write separately about the same vacation story. And the teacher has been known on different occasions, reportedly saying, did you copy that from your brother or sister? Because it's the same story. But
Oh,
no,
wow.
they did it separately.
Yeah.
And they still had the same favorite experience, or maybe that was their favorite vacation. And they
Yes.
wrote about it separately. And they may have even written it at different times and in different places through different strategies.
Yeah, right. But it's
They
still so
came
similar.
about the same way.
So is that an identical twin thing, or is it even occur in non-identical twins, this similarity?
Even in non-identicals, we
Oh,
have symptoms
wow.
the same. Yes.
So do you have, is there a theory or a hypothesis as to why that happens? Or how would you explain that phenomenon that?
Part of it is that twins share such common experiences that they not only share the same parents and experiences at going on vacation and being together, but there's a strong emotional bond between twins, whether they are fraternal or whether they are non-identical or identical. They still share this very strong bond. And part of that bond is, at the same time, experiences that are traumatic are often traumatic for both of them. Even if they don't directly involve both of them, it's a traumatic experience for both of them. And I could go on I have to make sure I'm not going down too many different roads, but there's a whole road to go down about the emotional life of twins. Because if something happens traumatic, it can affect the school performance. And it's not an academic problem, it's an emotional, psychological issue that's going on in the family or with that individual or with their twin brother or sister.
Yes, yeah.
And the fourth category of learning style that I investigated was the cognitive or psychological. And that included the perceptual modality. Do we like to first take in information with our hands, our tactile experience? Is it visual? Is it auditory? Or is it whole body, using our whole body? Children often are whole body. They like to act something out and really, be the animal they're trying to study or learn from.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is a preferred style. And we can actually work that into the learning environment at times.
Yes. Okay.
And I found that fascinating, that there are differences in how children perform and how they process information. There's also this right hemisphere, left hemisphere, how we look at life. Do we want to start with the big picture, which is more of a right processing modal, or do we want to break things down and look at the details first and then work up to the big picture? So, and oftentimes twins will share a common facet of those elements I've just mentioned, but they won't match all of them. There's not a one-to-one, again, not a one-to-one matching of those learning elements.
Yes. And so going back to what you said earlier, it's about, if I'm getting it correct, 60% of those different measures not measures, but the different factors of the learning styles, the components like the cognitive, the physiological, all of that is different even amongst the identical twins. And about 40% is shared or similar. Is that, that what we're saying? Yes. Okay.
And then within each of those categories, there were subcategories. So we're
Yes.
not looking at just 4 categories. We're looking at all the subcategories.
Yes,
And if I
absolutely.
compared
Okay.
all of those for a person's learning preference or learning style,
Yes.
I think there are 24 elements. Most people only have 5 or 6 that are really, really important to them.
Uh-huh.
And that would be considered their style or their preference.
Okay.
Looking and comparing those 5 or 6 elements between 2 individuals, it was clear that they only shared about 40% of those.
Yes.
And,
Okay.
and sometimes they were diametrically opposed. They were what we call discordant, where
Yes.
one would say, I want the room temperature to be hot, and the other one said, I want room temperature to be cold. They both had a
Yes.
strong preference for that, and they were opposites.
That was actually what I was wondering, was that discordance. How do parents and teachers, maybe particularly parents, because I think it would be very hard in the home environment, even just thinking about space and, maybe not having the ability to cater to the very specific, unique individual needs of each child in the family, even if, particularly if you have not just multiples, but you've got other children as well. But I'm wondering, do you have any tips for how do parents, I guess, first of all, how do parents recognize their individual multiples learning styles?
Mm-hmm.
And then what do they do about it to help enhance that for their multiples, for the individual children?
That's a very good question. And that's what I launched my first book with. I don't know if you have a copy of it or not.
Yes, I was looking.
Multiple
Understand.
births.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, let's give that before we move on. Let's give the title to the audience there. I'll have it here. Sorry, just bear with me. Understanding Multiple Birth Children and How They Learn, a handbook for
Yes.
parents, teachers, and administrators.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And even easier, I'll give you the website where you can get some of those surveys right off the website.
Oh, lovely. That'd be great.
The website is twineducation.org.
Twineducation.org. Yes, I'm
Yes.
definitely going to put that in the show notes as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
parents can go have a look at that, and there'll be questionnaires for parents to complete.
Yes. And you can print off and use any of that information. I developed the site with Dr. Pat Preedy from the UK. You probably have
Yes.
heard of her before.
Yes, and she will be on the show as
colleague.
well.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's going to?
Yeah, she's going to be on the show as well. So it'll be
great.
lovely to get that.
Great.
Yeah.
She is a wonderful professor and teacher and a modeler of what it really means to be a really good educator.
Yeah.
And she and I developed this website to put the information out there so that parents and teachers could have access to it. Because in other studies that I've done, I've learned that teachers don't know where to go for the information. Teachers do not know much about twin research other than what they've been taught about the psychological theories early on in psych courses. But they're not aware of all the research that's been done most recently. Especially the Australians and the Canadians have been on the forefront of a lot of the published studies about how twins should be taught and how we can nurture their learning in school. Yes. And so Pat and I put together this website. It's nothing fancy. And I learned that putting together a website is a very tall task. Don't ever believe somebody says, you can do this in 15 minutes. No. Anyway, it's not elegant. It's not beautiful, but the information is there. You can pull down the tabs and print off everything. We want you to use it. We even developed a course for teachers that teachers can take to get professional development in this area because it's very important. They can actually use the forms to find out some of the elements of a child's learning style.
Yeah, right. Okay, lovely. Hi there, fierce kind mama. Are you expecting multiples and wondering how you're going to cope when the babies arrive? Or do you already have multiples at home and wonder, will this ever get easier? First of all, let me say loud and clear, I get it. Feeling overwhelmed in motherhood is really common, and us mothers of multiples are particularly prone to feeling sometimes like it's all too much. I know for myself that becoming a first-time mother to twins at the age of 40 was a huge adjustment, physically and psychologically. So I've taken my years of training in mental health and my experience coaching mothers of multiples and put together a guide with my 5 top tips for overcoming overwhelm as a multiple birth parent. This guide is free, of course, and it doesn't matter what age multiples you have. You may be pregnant, or your multiples might have already left home. The principles apply to all parents of multiples. And because I know you're short on time, I've broken down the tips into easy-to-read chunks that you can begin implementing straight away. You can get your free copy now by signing up at my website, fiercekindmama.com. That's helpful for parents and for teachers. Would you be recommending that parents, if they have, say, their children are just starting school and they recommend this site to the teachers to have a look at, to kind of get an understanding of, because I don't know if a lot of teachers, what professional development they're getting in this area.
I would recommend it for all teachers.
Yeah, okay.
Because another thing that I found, because I teach future teachers, and I go to a lot of conferences with other teachers who are teaching in the schools, and I started interviewing them and collecting data from them. And they gave me a real eye-opening look that they don't know, not only that they don't know where to go to get the research or the information on this, but they don't even know how to make informed decisions, like the placement decision. There is a good answer to the placement decision. It's not an either or answer. It might not be the easy answer, and it may not be the one they want to grapple with. And Pat has developed a checklist that can help, if you're worried about placing a child into preschool or traditional first grade or kindergarten, she's developed a checklist that can help teachers and parents sit down and make the decision based on the evidence that's presented in the checklist. We've got to start making decisions based on good rationale, good data, good evidence, rather than on hunches. And a lot of what teachers have done, and I have to say, I too, before I knew about this, when I was teaching in my first 3 or 4 years of teaching, I made decisions based on other twins I had taught.
Yes.
But every set of twins is unique. And we've got to remember that. It's not the same home environment. It's not the same parents. If they are male twins, it's different from female. It's different if boy-girl twins. It's different if one of the twins has a special learning need.
Yes.
You've got to take into consideration, we've got to look at the individuals, because every person is really unique. I mean, twins are unique in themselves, but each set of twins is also unique.
Yes. And I think that's a really important point too, because I think you might get the situation where some teachers will be thinking, oh, I've had twins before. It'll just be, kind of go along with what I've done in the past, when not looking at each individual case as an individual case, and considering all the unique factors in that case. I think that's a really important point to make. So if parents go to this website, twineducation.org, they'll find some forms that they can complete to better understand their individual child, the individual multiples learning styles. And then will there have some suggestions about what parents can do to kind of facilitate that learning style or, help their multiples?
There is some information, some background information on the site that the parents can use. And I think I put a couple papers up that I've written and presented at conferences that parents can read and make use of. One of my purposes in starting this research, I made a commitment that I was going to try to give back to the parents and back to the twins, because I didn't want to use them. Like, I felt like they were always being used. And so one of the things that I always did was give everybody, if they took the learning style survey that I gave them their results. And so they could interpret and start to make use of that on their own.
Yes.
And many of the twins that were participating in my study, they knew and they confirmed the results after they saw them. They said, oh, yes, I do study this way. Yes. And I have tried differently, and I cannot study differently. And they recognize how they're different from their brother or sister as well, which is really interesting.
Yes. So they can pick up on that. They see the differences. And I wonder if, in some ways, I notice with my boys, they often do that. They often are quick to point out differences. Like, as an example, this is just an aside, but we've been reading this book So my boys are 6 years old, by the way. So they're still quite young. They've just started school last year, that they've completed their first year, and they're now going into summer holidays here. So they're going into their second year. And we've been reading this book, children's book that they've been practicing reading, which is, it's Ling and Ting, not exactly the same. And it's about two identical twin girls. But obviously, the book is highlighting their unique differences. And so when my boys read it, they're very quick to point out, even in the pictures, when the girls are dressed exactly the same, they say, oh no, but she looks different over here. She's got bigger cheeks or shorter hair, or, they're quick to point that out. Now, and I don't know if that's a bit of them trying to, I imagine as an identical twin, some effort goes into trying to differentiate yourself from your twin brother or sister.
I found an interesting characteristic, a difference between identical girls and identical boy twins.
Okay.
In regards to competition and
Yes.
noticing differences, the boys often competed, and it was a motivational factor for them to compete. The girls often competed, but they wanted to compete as a team against
That's
somebody
interesting.
else or some
Yeah.
other group. And often the girls, I remember even third grade girls saying to each other, you pick social studies and I'm going to pick math to be good in school. They negotiate very early on what they wanted to excel at because they didn't want to compete.
They didn't want to compete with one another.
Yes. And the
Yes.
boys, on the other hand, the boys found it fascinating and they wanted to compete and they liked to compete. And that was driving the force. Now, this is not for every set of twins or every
Yes.
set of boy twins or girl twins, but there was a pattern that more often the ways in which identical boys and identical girl twins compete is different.
Yes.
And
Interesting.
twin research has borne this out beautifully. And for a long time, 30 years ago, we would say boys compete and girls don't.
Yes.
But we know that's not right. We just never looked for it. It looks different. Women
Yes.
and men compete differently. Males and females compete differently. And
Yeah.
that's okay. We
Yeah.
just need to come to terms with it.
Yes, that's really fascinating. And I had never actually noticed that. But when I think about it now, I definitely see in my boys who they do compete with each other and they seem to like it. They seem to kind of want to push themselves by comparing and competing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if we could speak a little bit about that. Does that get in the way at all at school? Can this be a potential problem? And if so, how do, because I'm imagining there's healthy competition. And so I see it anyway, and I could be wrong. So please correct me if I am wrong, but I see competition maybe as being a bit of on a continuum where there might be extremes, but then there's a point where it's healthy and natural and okay. But there's also a tipping point maybe where it turns into a problem, because I can definitely, when I think about my own situation with my boys, there's sometimes a lot of frustration, both on their part and on my part, when, and I'll come in and I'll say, look, it's not a competition. That's because it's no longer fun. It's ending in tears or they're fighting. So could you speak a bit about that? When is it no longer healthy competition and what can we do about that?
When it no longer is motivating for either of them or both of them, when it becomes an article of pain or perhaps a period of great frustration, we don't want our children to be turned off to learning and to school and to exciting activities that they're engaged in. And I would say that it can be problematic if they compete on almost every task or on frequent tasks, whereas if they have some activities that they participate in by themselves, or maybe with mom on this and then you're with dad on that, if we divide up the competition so it's not so exacerbating, not so powerful in their life, then it can become less problematic.
Yeah. Okay.
And they begin to grow into it. They'll begin to understand that the competition is natural. The comparisons are always going to be there, but we don't want to emphasize them to the point where it demotivates people, especially the children. And that's the big point. we used to think that we needed to separate twins because they would be compared and they would be competing too much.
Yes.
We found out, again, this research only in the last 30 years shows that even if you separate them in different classrooms, teachers know they're twins. Kids know
Yes.
they're twins. Kids are going to try to make them compete or compare. It doesn't go away. You never get rid of it. It's always there. Now, the thing is to manage it,
Yes.
And eventually the boys or girls will say, this is getting too much. I don't want to compete, or this is too hard for me. And they will work it out. If both of them want to join band and take up the same instrument, well, that could be a good thing, or it could be problematic, depending on how it's approached.
Yes.
Or maybe only one of them wants to go out for basketball, and the other one says, I want to wait and maybe look for something else to do next year, or maybe do soccer. So there are times when they should have an opportunity to be their own selves.
Yes.
And there are times when they can compete healthy.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can kind of tell in your child whether it's motivating or whether it's too much. A little bit is okay. It's a little bit can be motivating, but too much is like, it can have the opposite effect of a positive learning experience.
Yes. And when you were speaking, I was thinking of the example that I had recently where my boys were riding our bikes and they were having fun, but then they wanted to play kind of a racing game. So they were clearly competing with one another. And it ended up in tears where one of my boys was crying and saying, I always lose. I'm always the loser. And that was at that point, it was clear to me, obviously, and I think to everybody else watching at the park, that this was no longer healthy competition. This was obviously now, it's not productive. It's not motivating. He's feeling bad about himself. So that was my cue to, let's move on. Let's do something else. Let's just, we'll have to distract you, separate different activities, whatever it is. So I think that's what I'm hearing you say, is that if it's no longer enjoyable, no one's, the fun is gone, the play aspect of it has left, or it's getting in the way, them actually achieving, then that's clearly a problem. And we have to, as parents, intervene and maybe separate or try to encourage different tasks at that particular moment.
Exactly. You can turn it away from direct competition with each other to competing against the clock.
Yes, that's another thing I do too.
Against something else that's happening, not direct head-on competition.
Yes, absolutely.
Found in the classroom, if it's too loud in the classroom and the teacher says, let's see if we can make it quieter by, doing this or that, they turn into a competition rather than go in and say, you're too loud in the classroom. The students are more likely to react positively because we're trying to beat the clock, or we're trying to push our chairs in quietly, or we're trying to compete against an inanimate object rather than head to head or person to person.
Yes,
so,
I love that.
Whenever you can kind of make that, a fun competition, it becomes much more enjoyable, and you're likely to have more winners that way.
Yes. I love that strategy, actually, the inanimate object, comparing it to competing against that, because I think it takes a lot of I imagine anyway, a lot of the emotion out of it more than when you're actually competing with another person.
Mm-hmm. Twins have the advantage of where they can compete together, especially if they're playing with their friends. They could pair off and say, let's see how many baskets we can make together.
Yes.
You made 3 and I made 4. So together we made 7.
Yes.
And that was more than the other brothers or sisters or other people playing made.
Yes.
So they can experience this winning together competition. So I'm not against competition. I'm against always head-to-head competition, I think, that can be so harmful sometimes with children. And I think a lot of the fun in activities is the activity itself. It shouldn't be the score that you get or who's the winner and who's the loser. It should be playing the game, should be the fun part.
The process and not the outcome. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And I wonder if we could end by talking a little bit about cooperation and how to encourage that amongst multiples, particularly if they are just sort of starting out in their school journey and they might be prone to fighting. I've heard some parents talk about this where they're a little bit worried, the twins or the multiples fight a fair bit at home, and they're worrying about how they're going to go at school. I mean, what would you say there in terms of how do we encourage cooperation amongst multiples that might have a tendency to argue?
The first step is to let the teacher know what is the family history, the family dynamic. Do the children get along? Do they need to be sitting near each other? Is it better that they're in different parts of the classroom? In some cases, that is a reason, one of the reasons to actually place them into separate classrooms.
Yes.
If the children are combative or they just aren't very cooperative or they're overly dependent on each other. And again, Pat Preedy goes into this quite well, how to recognize when a child's separation will actually help in a cooperation or competitive situation. But letting the teacher know, letting the teacher realize that the children are not always going to want to work together, nor should they always work together. They should not always be in the same groups, whether that's a reading group, a math group, a science lab, whatever they're working on, giving them their space in the room to themselves. And most times, twins will naturally gravitate that way. They will want to work in different areas or work with different children in the room. We can encourage them to have different friends. Some friends they will share. They'll have the same common friends. Some friends may be in their own, depending on what they like to do or their favorite books or, activities or songs or whatever. So encouraging that differentiation in the classroom. And even if they're in separate classrooms, letting them know where the other twin is, where their classroom is, and giving them time during the day to check on each other. Because one of the things I noticed was this checking behavior, where it's what parents often do when your children are playing. You look up every once in a while, or you kind of wonder if it's real quiet, what are they into, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You've got to get a visual cue, right? Check on what's going on. The same thing happens with twins very often, where one will be working on something in the classroom, the other one's working, and they'll look up and they'll look over to see if the other one is safe and if everything's okay. And if they're in another classroom, they'll want to do the same thing. They'll want to pass by the classroom, not interrupt, but want to know, how is my brother or sister doing in that other classroom?
Yes.
And we have found, again, I had several twins report that even in elementary school, when they were in separate classrooms and they were never allowed to see each other, some of the girls were so clever that at 10:30 in the morning, they would both go to the restroom at the same time so they could talk in the restroom about, how's your day going? How's your day going? They needed that checkup time with each other. And I think we need to build that into the understanding that that's part of their emotional development. It's part of their psyche. And they are going to want to do that throughout their life. It's not going to stop after they're adults, because they're still going to want to call each other and find out how they're doing. And they'll feel, we have all these stories about wanting to stay in touch and keeping in touch. They want to be cooperative, but they also want to find their own way in the world.
Yeah.
And that is a process. It is not going to stop when they enter school. It is not going to stop when they finish school. It is a lifelong process. We are all, in some way, still in the process of being who we should become. And twins even more so, because they have the added burden of not only discovering who they are as individuals, but who they are as a set of twins, as a pair in a set of twins.
Yes.
And that's a very unique situation that can yield great benefits, but also some challenges.
Absolutely. And I think that key point there that you said around that checking in and building that into the school experience is so important, particularly if the multiples are separated in different classrooms. I think one thing that did come up, and I know I said I had just one more question for you, but if you don't mind and you do have time, I'd love to ask you just another question that has often come up in terms when I speak to multiple birth families, which is what to do when one twin in the twinship, for example, or one of the multiples achieves something, some success, some maybe award or acknowledgement, and the other one doesn't. So maybe they've both tried out for a sports team or a part in a play or something. One of them wins, if you like, and the other one doesn't. how do we as parents handle that and, acknowledge the achievement, but also manage the real disappointment in the other twin or multiple? Do you have any
Uh,
advice around that?
yeah, they could try to offer some insight. You try to handle it as you would any other of your children if they were not twins. We try to celebrate the fact that one has had a success, and we want to celebrate that. And another, you tried and you weren't successful. That's, in some ways, that's a whole learning experience in itself. We all are going to have that experience one way or another. But
Yeah.
with the twinship, we celebrate that it was my twin, my brother, my family member who
Yes.
was successful. So you turn it into a family triumph, a brother's triumph. And
Yes.
many times, the boys, I remember interviewing some college students who said that they were such fierce competitors that the coach wouldn't even let them wrestle each other. They were both on a wrestling team. And the coach
Yes.
said, I didn't want you wrestling each other. I thought you'd hurt each other. You were so competitive. And they were. But here's what they said. They said, if I can't win, I want my brother to win.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody who's not my brother or not in my family to win.
Yeah.
If you put it
Lovely.
in
Yeah.
those terms,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes we win. When you win, we win.
Yes.
And in some ways, the females were saying the same thing. We want to compete together because we both want to win. We'd rather cooperate and compete and win. So they still
Yes.
want to compete, okay? But they would like to compete together.
Mm.
So women and girls are very competitive, just as competitive as boys, but it shows itself differently. And
Yes.
this whole idea of celebrating the fact that we can celebrate someone when they win
Yes.
is a wonderful experience. And hopefully we can give our children, maybe you didn't make it on this team or you didn't succeed in this event. Let's find something else where you can be successful, because that's part of the learning and life issues, right? We
Yeah.
all have to discover what in life can I excel at where I can actually become successful.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
And
and that's
recognize,
why I
yeah.
encourage children or families to discover what is it that your children, your boys really like to do. Some things maybe together, maybe they both like soccer, but
Yeah.
maybe one likes to read mystery books and one likes scouting or camping.
Yes.
Nurture that. Nurture it
Yeah.
through your family. Maybe grandpa will take you to, a camping trip or go camping, and maybe you're interested in books, so somebody else will go with you to the library. Encourage the growth of each child's strengths, and that's part of their learning style.
Yes. Yes. And it all comes back to recognizing their individual needs and desires, doesn't it? And I think that that's a really nice way to summarize all of this is we really, as parents, as educators, need to acknowledge and nurture the individual strengths of each child. And I love the way also, you spoke about that acknowledgement of the family achievement, so you might not personally, one twin or multiple hasn't maybe been successful on this occasion, but there is still something here to celebrate. And that's the accomplishment of the other child or, the other multiple. And we can still find things that the one who hasn't achieved, say on this occasion, we can still find things that you're good at. I think that's a really important point to make too.
And we have to remind teachers never to withhold something because they're worried about hurting a child's feelings. Because if they
Yes.
earned it, they deserve it.
Yes.
And their sibling would say they would be doubly hurt if their brother or sister did not get the award or the acclamation that they were due.
Yes.
And there have been times when teachers or those in authority have said, we don't want to give the award only to one because we're worried about what their brother twin is going to think.
Yes.
And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's
and I think it's also, yes, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just thinking
that's all
it's
I
part
was
of the
going to say. It's
lesson.
part of the learning that we
Exactly.
all have to go through, right? There are going to be
Yes.
disappointments. So these are learning opportunities.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, John, for coming on to today's show, sharing your wisdom, your professional experience, and all of the knowledge that you've gained over the years about the learning styles of twins and multiples. There's so much more I could ask you. And I would love, if you have time, we could speak about you coming back on the show to share even more of your knowledge. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you've heard, then please consider subscribing and leaving a review so that other expectant and current parents of multiples like yourself can find this podcast and the valuable information it contains. I would be so very grateful if you left a review and shared this with anyone you think could benefit from listening. If you have a particular topic you'd like me to cover on this podcast, feel free to reach out to me via my website, fiercekindmama.com. Or connect with me on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples. New episodes are released every fortnight, so we'll see you back here real soon. Any advice and information in this podcast is general only and has been prepared without taking into account your particular circumstances and needs. For tailored, individualized advice, please consult with a qualified professional.